Fleet Admiral Jae-sung Kim stood on the bridge of the human diplomatic vessel Peaceful Dawn watching the tactical display as they approached the Zirian system. The stars ahead looked normal and quiet, but his senses told a different story. 3 massive battle fleets hung in space around the contested system, each one representing thousands of warships and millions of soldiers ready to fight. The Zirian system contained something that had turned the galaxy's 3 most powerful empires into enemies overnight. Deep beneath the surface of Zirian Prime, miners had discovered the largest deposit of quantum crystals ever found in known space. These crystals were not just valuable, they were essential for faster-than-light communication technology that held galactic civilization together. Ambassador Minute-Ho Park walked onto the bridge carrying a thick folder of diplomatic files. He had spent the last 3 days reading reports about the crisis that was threatening to tear the galaxy apart. His usually neat black hair was messy from running his hands through it, and his formal diplomatic uniform looked wrinkled from too many sleepless nights. "Admiral," he said, setting down the folder and pointing to the tactical display, "let me make sure I understand this situation correctly. The stellar hegemony claims historical rights to the Zirian system because their ancestors explored this region 800 years ago." "That's correct," Kim replied, highlighting the hegemony's massive fleet in red on the display. 12,000 warships under Supreme Commander Vextar. They've been building up their forces for 6 months. The Galactic Federation argues legal precedent because they were the first to establish mining colonies in the system, even though that was only 50 years ago. "Also correct," Kim said, switching the display to show the Federation fleet in blue. 10,000 ships under Admiral Korth. They arrived 3 months ago and have been fortifying ever since. And the Crimson Empire demands resource compensation because the crystals were discovered using technology they developed, even though they never actually claimed the system. "Exactly," Kim confirmed, showing the Empire's gold-colored fleet. 15,000 ships under Emperor Zashtai. They showed up last month and declared the entire system under Imperial protection. Captain Sora Lee, the ship's tactical officer, shook her head in amazement. "Ambassador, I have to ask the obvious question. Why did they call us to mediate this crisis? We don't even have a real military. Our entire space fleet consists of maybe 200 ships, most of which are converted civilian vessels." Park smiled, but there was something in his expression that made Kim feel slightly uncomfortable. It was the kind of smile that suggested the ambassador knew something that everyone else was missing. Dr. Yee-Jin Choi, Earth's chief diplomatic strategist, looked up from her own analysis reports. She was a small woman with quick, intelligent eyes who had spent her entire career studying alien psychology and political systems. "Captain Lee," she said quietly, "that's exactly why they called us. Everyone in the galaxy trusts humans because we're too weak to be a threat to anyone. We're the only species that all 3 empires can agree on as neutral mediators." Communications Officer Hayoung Jung turned from her station. "I've been monitoring the diplomatic channels. The 3 empires have been trying to negotiate this themselves for 8 months. Every time they meet, the talks break down within hours." "Why?" asked Admiral Kim. "Because none of them trust each other," Jung replied. "The hegemony thinks the Federation is trying to steal their historical claims. The Federation believes the Empire is planning to militarize the system. The Empire is convinced the other 2 are plotting against them." Economic specialist Dong Hyun-oh had been reviewing the financial projections related to the crisis. "Admiral, the economic impact of this standoff is affecting the entire galaxy. Trade routes are being disrupted because ships are afraid to travel through contested space. 3 major trade agreements have been cancelled because nobody knows who will control the quantum crystal supply." Park walked over to the main view screen, which showed the beautiful but deadly scene ahead of them. The 3 battle fleets were positioned in a triangle formation around the Zirian system, each one close enough to strike at the others but far enough apart to maintain the illusion of peace. "The situation is actually quite simple," Park said, speaking more to himself than to the others. 3 powerful neighbors are fighting over something valuable, and they're all too proud to back down. So they invited the weakest kid in the neighborhood to help them find a solution that lets everyone save face. "That sounds reasonable," Captain Lee said. "It would be reasonable," Park replied, "except for one small detail." Dr. Choi looked up from her reports with understanding growing in her eyes. The detail being that they don't understand what human diplomacy actually involves. "What do you mean?" Admiral Kim asked. "They think human diplomacy is about creating peace through careful negotiation and mutual compromise," Park explained. "They believe we'll find some harmless middle ground that makes everyone happy while leaving the real power structure unchanged." Security Chief Minute Jung Yoon frowned. And that's not what we're going to do. Park turned away from the view screen and looked at each member of his team. The smile on his face was still warm and friendly, but now Kim could see something else in his eyes, the look of a chess player who was thinking several moves ahead of his opponents. No, that's not what we're going to do, Park said calmly. What the galaxy's major powers don't understand is that humans have a very different definition of peaceful resolution than everyone else does. Which is? Dr. Choi asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Peaceful resolution means everyone stops fighting because they're all doing what we want them to do. The mediation talks were scheduled to begin aboard Harmony Station, a massive neutral facility that had been specially constructed for diplomatic meetings between hostile powers. The station floated in empty space exactly halfway between the three Empire fleets, its golden halls designed to inspire peace and cooperation. Ambassador Minute-Ho Park arrived with his delegation aboard a simple human transport ship that looked tiny compared to the magnificent vessels carrying the Empire representatives. As they docked, he could see the impressive diplomatic ships through the station's transparent walls. Each one was larger than most Earth cities and decorated with symbols of power and authority. The stellar hegemony had brought a delegation of 300 representatives, each one a specialist in some aspect of interstellar law, military strategy, or economic policy. Their ship was a work of art, covered in mathematical symbols that glowed within a light. The Galactic Federation's delegation was equally impressive, consisting of 250 legal experts, historians, and cultural specialists. Their vessel looked like a floating library, with data storage banks visible through crystal windows. The Crimson Empire had taken a different approach, bringing only 50 representatives but each one wearing armor that cost more than most planets' annual budgets. Their ship bristled with weapons that were supposedly decorative but looked fully functional. Ambassador Park's delegation consisted of 5 people total. He carried a simple paper notepad and a pen that he had bought at a convenience store on Earth for less than $1. The opening ceremony was held in the station's Great Hall, a chamber so large that it had its own weather system. The ceiling was transparent, offering a view of the stars above, while the floor was made of some kind of crystal that reflected light in beautiful patterns. Each Empire delegation took their turn presenting their opening positions. The ceremonies alone took 6 hours, with formal speeches, traditional music, and elaborate displays of cultural significance. When it was finally time for the actual negotiations to begin, Ambassador Park stood up and walked to the center of the hall. He ignored the advanced holographic presentation system and the formal podium that had been prepared for him. "Let me make sure I understand the situation correctly," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber without any electronic assistance. "You 3 empires are willing to fight a war that could kill millions of people over mining rights to some crystals in the ground." Supreme Commander Vextar of the Stellar Hegemony rose from his delegation's elevated platform. He was a tall, imposing figure whose uniform was covered with medals and honors from dozens of military campaigns. "Ambassador Park," he said in a voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "these are not just some crystals. Quantum crystals are the foundation of faster-than-light communication technology. Control of the largest known deposit determines the balance of power for the next 1,000 years of galactic history. And all 3 of you are prepared to go to war over this." Admiral Korth of the Galactic Federation stood up next. She was a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. "If war becomes necessary to protect our legal rights and establish claims, then yes. The Federation has invested enormous resources in developing the Zerian system. We will not abandon our colonies to foreign conquest." Emperor Zashtai of the Crimson Empire remained seated but spoke with a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of space itself. "The Empire's technological innovations made the discovery of these crystals possible. We demand fair compensation for our contributions, or we will take what is rightfully ours by force." Captain Tai Minute-O, who was serving as military advisor to the human delegation, leaned over and whispered quietly to Dr. Yi-Jin Choi, "Is it just me, or do they all seem excited about the possibility of fighting each other?" Dr. Choi nodded slightly. She had been observing the body language and vocal patterns of the 3 delegations throughout the opening ceremonies. They've been preparing for this conflict for so long that war has become more appealing than compromise. Each side believes they can win, and they're eager to prove it. Ambassador Park continued his examination of the situation, walking slowly around the chamber as he spoke. "This is very interesting. You've all prepared extensively for war. You have battle plans, supply lines, propaganda campaigns, and victory celebrations already planned." "Of course," replied Supreme Commander Vextar with pride. The hegemony does not enter conflicts without proper preparation. I'm sure you don't, Park said with a smile that was beginning to make the alien delegates uncomfortable. But I noticed something curious. You've all prepared for war, but nobody has prepared for peace. What do you mean by that? Asked Admiral Korth. I mean that none of you have exit strategies. You've all committed so much national prestige, so many resources, and so much public attention to this conflict that you can't back down without looking weak to your own people. The chamber fell silent as the implications of Park's observation began to sink in. You're trapped, Park continued, his voice gentle but his words cutting. Each of you has painted yourselves into a corner where anything less than total victory will be seen as humiliating defeat. Dr. Choi realized what Ambassador Park was building toward, and she felt both admiration and concern for what he was about to propose. Ambassador, she said carefully, are you suggesting that we help them find a way to back down while still looking strong to their own populations? Park's smile grew wider, and for the first time since arriving at Harmony Station, he looked completely confident and relaxed. Dr. Choi, I'm suggesting something much more interesting than that. Ambassador Park walked to the center of the great negotiation chamber and did something that had never been done in the history of galactic diplomacy. Instead of presenting a careful, respectful analysis of all sides' positions, he looked directly at the three most powerful military leaders in the galaxy and told them they were all going to lose. Here's your situation, he announced in the same tone a teacher might use to explain a simple math problem to children. If any one of your empires attacks the Zirian system, the other two will immediately unite against the attacker. The chamber erupted in angry protests. Supreme Commander Vextar of the Stellar Hegemony stood up so quickly that his ceremonial chair fell backward with a crash that echoed through the huge room. Impossible, he declared, his voice filled with outrage. The Federation and the Empire are our enemies. They would never work together, especially not to help each other. Military advisor Jinwoo Yoon had prepared for this reaction. He walked to the front of the chamber and activated a simple holographic display that showed basic military formations and strategic positions. His charts looked like something a child might draw with crayons compared to the sophisticated presentations the empires had prepared. Let's work through this step by step, Yoon said calmly. Hegemony attacks first. What happens next? He moved simple colored shapes on his display to represent the different fleets. Federation and Empire both know that whoever wins this fight will control the galaxy's quantum crystal supply. That means the winner becomes the dominant power and the losers become junior partners at best. Admiral Korth of the Galactic Federation was studying Yoon's simple charts with growing alarm. You're suggesting that we would ally with the Empire against the hegemony? Basic military logic, Yoon replied. Better to share power with one enemy than to lose all power to another enemy. Emperor Zashtai of the Crimson Empire had been silent during this exchange, but now he leaned forward in his elaborate throne. This analysis assumes that we cannot achieve total victory against both enemies simultaneously. Can you? Park asked directly. The question hung in the air for several long seconds. Emperor Zashtai was known throughout the galaxy as a brilliant military strategist who had never lost a battle. But as he considered the numbers, his confidence began to waver. The combined forces of two empires would be challenging, he admitted reluctantly. Challenging? Economic specialist Sejin Nam stepped forward with her own set of simple charts. Emperor, challenging is when you have to fight hard to win. This is impossible. No military force in galactic history has ever won a war against two enemy empires at the same time. She activated her display showing resource calculations. Meanwhile, any war in the Zirian system would completely disrupt quantum crystal mining for decades. The orbital bombardments, space battles, and ground fighting would destroy the very thing you're fighting over. The three delegations began running their own calculations, and each group slowly reached the same horrible conclusion. Ambassador Park was absolutely right. None of them could win this war, and the fighting would destroy the prize they were trying to claim. So what do you propose? Asked Supreme Commander Vextar, his earlier confidence now replaced with careful calculation. Simple, Park said, pulling out his notepad and drawing what looked like a child's diagram of the Zirian system. All three fleets withdraw from the system and announce that the entire operation was a joint military training exercise. A training exercise? Admiral Korth sounded offended. We have committed the pride of three civilizations to this conflict. And now you're going to commit the wisdom of three civilizations to avoiding unnecessary bloodshed, Park replied. Then, once everyone has safely backed away from the edge of war, you establish a three-way mining consortium to jointly develop the quantum crystal deposits. The alien delegates stared at him in confusion. Trade Minister Hyo Jung-kwon stood up to help explain the concept. Think of it like this, she said, drawing simple diagrams on Park's notepad. Instead of fighting over who gets to take all the crystals, you work together to mine all the crystals and split the profits 3 ways. But our national honor, protested Emperor Zashtai. How can we withdraw our fleets without appearing weak to our own people? Park had been waiting for this objection. Your national honor gets preserved because you're all making the same choice at exactly the same time. Nobody is backing down from the conflict. You're all advancing together toward a smarter solution that benefits everyone. Dr. Yijin Choi watched the faces of the alien delegates as they processed this idea. She could see the moment when each group realized that Park's plan would actually work. The beauty of this approach, Park continued, is that everyone gets to claim victory. The hegemony gets to say they found a solution that avoided unnecessary war. The Federation gets to say they negotiated a fair agreement that protected their interests. The Empire gets to say they achieved their goals through superior strategy rather than brute force. Military advisor Yoon added the final piece of the puzzle. And 6 months from now, when the Joint Mining Consortium is producing quantum crystals for everyone, your people won't remember that you almost went to war. They'll only remember that their leaders were smart enough to find a peaceful solution. The plan was so simple that it seemed almost insulting to the sophisticated minds of the 3 Empire delegations. But it was also so logical that none of them could find any flaws in its structure. Ambassador Park closed his notepad and looked around the chamber. Gentlemen, you asked for human mediation to help you find a peaceful resolution to your conflict. This is what peaceful resolution looks like. The signing ceremony for the Zirian Consortium agreement took place in Harmony Station's most formal chamber. The 3 empires had brought their finest diplomats and their most elaborate ceremonial items for the historic occasion. Supreme Commander Vextar signed the document using a crystalline stylus that projected holographic symbols in the air. Admiral Korth used a bioorganic signing device that grew her signature from living ink. Emperor Zashtai simply touched the document, and his energy signature was imprinted directly onto the quantum-encrypted paper. Ambassador Park signed his name with the same cheap pen he had been using throughout the negotiations. But as the celebration continued, Park quietly added one small detail that would change everything. Of course, he said casually to the assembled delegates, the consortium will require neutral oversight to ensure fair operation and prevent disputes between the 3 parties. Oversight by whom? Asked Supreme Commander Vextar. Earth will provide administrative support, Park replied, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. We're the only party that all 3 empires trust to remain neutral. The alien delegates nodded agreement without really thinking about what they were agreeing to. After all, Earth was a minor power with no real military strength. What harm could human administrative support possibly cause? Dr. Yijin Choi watched the documents being finalized and felt a mixture of admiration and concern for what Park had just accomplished. She leaned over and whispered in Korean to economic specialist Sejin Nam, "Do they realize what they just signed?" Nam looked at the legal documents and whispered back, "They just gave us operational control of the galaxy's most strategic resource. And they asked us to take it." The signing ceremony concluded with formal toasts and diplomatic pleasantries. Each empire delegation departed believing they had achieved a face-saving compromise that avoided war while protecting their interests. They returned to their home worlds as heroes who had found a peaceful solution to an impossible problem. What they failed to understand was that Ambassador Park had been playing a much longer game than any of them had realized. Within 3 weeks of the Zirian agreement, similar conflicts began arising across the galaxy. The success of human mediation in preventing a 3-empire war had made Earth's diplomatic services suddenly very popular. Intelligence Officer Hyun-Soo Jang was working late in his office when the requests began flooding in. "Ambassador," he called to Park, who was reviewing reports from the new Zirian mining operations, "we're receiving requests for mediation services from across known space." "How many requests?" 17 major conflicts in the past month, sir. Border disputes, trade disagreements, territorial claims, resource conflicts, everyone wants human mediators now." Park looked at the list of conflicts and smiled. Each one involved strategic locations, valuable resources, or important trade routes. "And I assume they all want the same kind of peaceful resolution we provided at Zirian." "Exactly, sir. They specifically request neutral human oversight as part of any agreement." Captain Sora Lee had been studying the galactic territorial maps, tracking the locations where humans were being invited to provide oversight services. What she discovered made her call for an immediate meeting with the entire diplomatic team. Look at this, she said, projecting a three-dimensional map of local galactic space. Red dots marked every location where humans now provided neutral oversight services. We're not just administering random locations. We're building a network. Trade Minister Young-Ho Kwon examined the map and whistled softly. These positions control major hyperspace routes, communication relay stations, and resource extraction facilities. If you connect these dots, we control the infrastructure backbone of 3 galactic sectors, finished Defense Minister Chan Ho-kang, who had been analyzing the strategic implications of their expanding influence. Dr. Choi stared at the map in amazement. Ambassador, they invited us to take control of critical infrastructure across a significant portion of the galaxy. And they did it voluntarily, Park noted with satisfaction. Every single expansion of human authority was specifically requested by the parties involved. The beauty of the situation was that Earth had never demanded anything. They had never threatened anyone. They had never even suggested that they wanted galactic influence. Instead, they had simply solved problems in a way that required human oversight, and the galaxy's major powers had eagerly agreed to every arrangement. Within 6 months, human administrators were overseeing mining operations, trade stations, communication hubs, and diplomatic facilities across dozens of star systems. Each individual agreement seemed small and reasonable. But together, they gave Earth more practical influence than many civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. The galaxy's major powers had made a fundamental mistake in their understanding of human nature. They had assumed that human diplomacy was about creating peace for its own sake, about finding compromises that made everyone happy while changing nothing important. They had failed to understand that human diplomacy was actually about creating advantage. Not through conquest or threats, but through becoming so useful and trustworthy that other people voluntarily gave you control over the things you needed. The most human kind of diplomacy, Park had called it. And he was right. The emergency assembly convened 6 months after the Zerian agreement, when the galaxy's major powers finally understood what had actually happened to them. The meeting was held aboard the same Harmony station where Ambassador Park had first introduced his simple solutions to complex problems. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of the formal, respectful gathering from before, the chamber was filled with angry voices, desperate accusations, and the growing realization that somehow, the galaxy's weakest species had outmaneuvered everyone else. Ambassador Minute-Ho Park walked into the chamber to face representatives from 4 to 7 different civilizations, all demanding explanations for what they were calling the human situation. The delegates no longer treated him with the polite condescension they had shown 6 months earlier. Now they looked at him with a mixture of anger, fear, and grudging respect. Supreme Commander Vextar was the first to speak, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Ambassador Park, you told us you were mediating for peace. You promised neutral solutions that would benefit everyone equally. And we did mediate for peace, Park replied in the same calm tone he had used throughout their previous negotiations. When was the last time you heard about a major galactic war? There haven't been any significant military conflicts in the 6 months since we began our mediation services. But Earth now controls strategic resources across 3 entire sectors. Vextar's accusation echoed through the chamber, and Park could see other delegates nodding in agreement. Because you kept asking us to provide neutral oversight, Park replied, spreading his hands in a gesture of innocent confusion. Every single expansion of human administrative authority was specifically requested by the parties involved. We never demanded anything. You offered everything. Emperor Zashtai stood up from his throne with such force that the metal groaned under the strain. His face was dark with anger and embarrassment. This is manipulation. Deception. You tricked us into giving you control. Cultural analyst Eun Seo Bae, who had been quietly observing the proceedings from her seat near the back of the human delegation, stood up and activated a holographic display showing the legal documents from every mediation session. Your Majesty, she said with polite formality, we told you exactly what we were going to do at every step of every negotiation. You chose to interpret neutral administration as harmless oversight. That misunderstanding was your choice, not our deception. Dr. Yijin Choi activated her own display, showing the complete legal record of human diplomatic activities. Document after document appeared in the air, each one signed willingly by the parties involved. Every agreement was voluntary, she announced to the assembled delegates. Every expansion of human authority was requested by you. Every grant of administrative control was offered freely in exchange for peaceful resolution of your conflicts. The horrible truth was becoming clear to everyone in the chamber. The humans had not conquered anyone through military force. They had not threatened anyone into submission. They had not even demanded that anyone give them control over anything. They had simply been so effective at solving problems that the galaxy's major powers had voluntarily handed them the keys to galactic civilization. This isn't real diplomacy, protested Gentle Current of Understanding from the Aquatic Collective, her robes shifting to angry red colors. Real diplomacy is about mutual understanding, cultural respect, and gradual building of trust between species. Defense Minister Chan Ho-Kang, who had been quietly reviewing strategic reports during the exchanges, looked up with a smile that was both friendly and slightly dangerous. No, he said politely, that's your diplomacy. Human diplomacy is about getting what we need while making everyone think it was their own idea. The chamber fell silent as the full implications of his words sank in. Emperor Zashtai was the first to break the silence. How do we reverse this situation? He demanded. How do we reclaim control over our own territories and resources? Ambassador Park looked around the chamber at the faces of delegates who had finally understood that they had been outmaneuvered by a species they had considered primitive and harmless. You don't reverse it, he said simply. You created this situation by consistently choosing the easy path instead of the hard one. Every time you faced a difficult problem, you asked someone else to solve it for you. We just happen to be very good at solving problems. Intelligence Officer Hyun Soo Jang stood up and quietly announced information that made several delegates gasp with shock. For the record, human mediators are currently being requested to oversee conflicts in 12 additional sectors. The requests are arriving faster than we can process them. The delegates looked at each other with growing horror as they realized the true scope of their collective mistake. They had not just given humans control over a few mining operations. They had established a precedent where human oversight was seen as the solution to any major galactic problem. But you're supposed to be the peaceful species, protested Supreme Commander Vextar, desperation clear in his voice. You're supposed to be harmless. Park smiled with genuine warmth, the same expression he had worn throughout every negotiation session. We are peaceful, Commander. We've prevented dozens of wars through careful negotiation and mutual compromise. The fact that we've also built the largest sphere of influence in galactic history is just efficient administration. As the emergency session ended with no solutions and no hope of reversing the human expansion, dozens of young diplomats from various species approached the human delegation. But unlike before, when they had been seeking to learn human negotiating techniques, now they were asking different questions. Ambassador Park, said a junior Zentorian diplomat, now that we understand how human diplomacy really works, how do we negotiate with you? Park considered the question seriously. The same way you always have. You tell us what you want, we tell you what we want, and we find a solution that works for everyone. But knowing that you're manipulating the outcome to benefit humanity? We're not manipulating anything, Park replied with complete honesty. We're just better at seeing where negotiations naturally lead. Dr. Choi looked concerned as they prepared to leave the station. Sir, I think the galaxy finally understands that human diplomacy isn't really about creating peace. Park watched the alien delegates filing out of the chamber, each one now fully aware that future negotiations with humanity would be very different than they had expected. No, Dr. Choi. Human diplomacy has always been about creating peace. We just never mentioned that we prefer the kind of peace where everyone does what we want them to do. *The end*.